Welcome, builders of the internet. My name is Jessa and I work in construction. It may not come as a surprise that the construction sector is a leading contributor for pollution and environmental hazards, and today I'm going to talk about what exactly is the impact that the construction industry has on the environment, and I'll also be briefly discussing some of the potential solutions. As always, you can find my sources in the description.
On my mind.
Emissions. To start off, I'll talk about a pretty common topic when discussing the environment. Emissions in this context are the gases and particles that are released into the air. For example, there are various carbon emissions, such as carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, and carbon particulates, which includes soot that is produced from combustion. In the UK, carbon dioxide emissions from the construction industry have risen in the past 30 years, from 8.9 to 13.4 million metric tonnes from 1990 to 2018, and buildings and construction works contribute to around 40% of the overall carbon emissions in the world, with around 80% of this actually coming from buildings that are already in use. This means that nearly 30% of all the carbon emissions in the world come from us using energy to heat up or light and maintain buildings. That's not to say that it's only carbon that we need to watch out for. Construction sites are estimated to be responsible for about 7% of the total nitrogen emissions, which can have negative impacts on the respiratory system, with some studies showing a relationship between short-term exposure and higher hospital admissions for respiratory illnesses. There are also sulfur dioxide emissions, which affects the respiratory system as well, and it irritates the eyes in some cases. These emissions have been decreasing in the UK for the past 30 years, with about 100 metric tonnes being produced a year from 2011 onwards. Contamination. Construction doesn't just impact the air, it can contaminate water and elements in the ground too. Pollutants such as diesel, oil, cement, glues and other toxic chemicals in construction can end up soaking into groundwater through drains or maybe directly seeping into soils, rivers and lakes. The groundwater can be much harder to treat and is often a source of drinking water. Therefore, there's a risk that some chemicals can actually end up being consumed by both animals and humans, which has the potential to have severe environmental consequences. On construction sites, the soils can be affected by ongoing activities. For example, there can be petroleum products that actually cause irreversible changes where the soil can no longer absorb and retain moisture. Oil can also enter into the ground directly through the machinery, which are products that take a long time to decompose too. Soil acts like a universal sink, and this retains and absorbs residue and byproducts of construction. There are other soil pollution locations apart from sites that do get impacted, including landfills and underground storage tanks when they rupture. Contaminated soil basically degrades a lot quicker and ultimately limits the opportunity for wildlife to resume there later. Biodiversity. Biodiversity is the variety of life on the planet in all forms and interactions. Several established biodiversity hotspots in the world are forecast to have large percentages becoming urbanized by 2030, including Guinean forests in West Africa, Japan, Philippines, Caribbean islands, and Sri Lanka. Around the year of 2000, some of these places were relatively undisturbed by urban development, but are now showing the highest rates of urban growth. Over a quarter of amphibian, reptilian and mammal classes will be affected by this, with habitats being destroyed. Parts of Africa and Europe are expected to have the highest percentage of species being affected by expansion of urban areas, and in the Americas it shows the largest actual numbers of species being affected. A reduction in biodiversity means that there is less ecosystem productivity, so less food is converted to biomass, as well as threatening the structure and functioning of the system. Whilst yes, ecosystems can adapt, beyond a certain point of species diminishing in number, the system can destabilise and collapse, which sometimes includes becoming a barren wasteland. The first 30 years of the 21st century is expected to experience more expansion of urban land than any previous point in history, which emphasises how important it is for the construction industry, as well as other sectors such as agriculture, to take steps to minimise the damage to the environment. Materials. So far, I've mentioned some of the emissions that can be produced with construction, and in this segment I'll discuss some of the impact of the materials that are used in the industry too. Building materials are considered to have 5 stages in their life cycle: mining, which includes the extraction or harvesting of materials, manufacture, construction, use, and demolition. The most major environmental impacts are in mining and manufacture, but demolition is increasingly becoming more impactful, with problems associated with waste disposal. One example of a harmful material is concrete. It is the second most widely used substance on Earth after water. It's a popular material in construction, with its weight, endurance, and ability to resist the effects of nature for decades. However, it is responsible for between 4 to 8% of carbon emissions and about 10% of industrial water use, and adding to the heat island effect, where the warmth of the sun and, say, gases from car exhausts gets absorbed and results in a hotter temperature for us. Another toxic material is polyvinyl chloride, PVC, which is commonly used in drainage pipes, door and window frames, and flooring. Some studies have indicated that it exposes humans and the environment to toxic substances and can contain some dioxins, which are classified as carcinogens, and these lead to cancer and other serious health issues. These are just a few of the many materials which can have negative impacts, but they are still commonly used. There are various technologies and upcoming alternatives that are being produced to help combat this impact. However, with concrete and PVC being relatively cheap to produce as well, it often makes the material of choice for building projects. Wastage. In the European Union, over 2 billion tonnes of waste are generated every year, around half of which is from the construction sector. In England, this industry also produces the most waste, about 33%, followed by mining and quarrying. Around 10% of materials go to waste in construction, from producing materials, the handling and storage of them, and sometimes even from simply transporting them from one place to another, where they might be damaged along the way. A significant portion of this is disposed of in landfills, which can be dangerous in itself, contaminating the land, reducing biodiversity, and even potentially collapsing. For example, in December 2015, a landslide of construction debris resulted in over 70 individuals being killed and demolishing several factories and homes. This, of course, was a terrible incident, but with landfills forever increasing in volume, clearly more needs to be done to lessen the impacts. So, what are some of the solutions? I'll now briefly cover some of the possible solutions for these contributions. I do think it's quite an extensive topic though, so I'll probably go about it in more detail in another video, but essentially everybody could do their part to help reduce impacts, no matter if you're living in the most energy efficient building in the world or if you're planning for a huge construction site. With building use contributing to around 80% of their carbon emissions produced overall, perhaps we can be more careful in how much energy that we waste at home through, say, heat, electricity, etc. In terms of building projects and sites, ensuring that workers are trained properly so there is less material wastage, utilising recycled or low energy materials, and perhaps considering some more of the long-term benefits over the short-term costs. A lot of materials like concrete and PVC are relatively cheap, but if you want a project with sustainability at its core, looking at the upcoming alternatives and assessing their impacts can sometimes outweigh the higher upfront expenses. Sometimes it is hard to tell which solutions are really the best, because sometimes products that are framed as sustainable may actually incorporate so many chemicals and energy-consuming processes that it's just as harmful as the non-renewable alternatives. Sustainability and reducing impacts on the environment can be such a complicated discussion, but I think it's definitely worthwhile. That's all I have to say about construction for now. I hope it helped build on your mind.
Thanks for watching this channel, it's building on my mind. Check out my other videos, but first hit the bell and comment, like, subscribe. Please, it really helps with the